Following on from last week's video, I will be looking at the FJ personality types and their least favourite things according to the post. First is Isfjs. They dislike inconsiderate people, which will be linked with their secondary FE. FE values harmony, and people who are inconsiderate will likely cause disharmony and conflict, thus upsetting FE and therefore the Isfj. I would also say that TI would have an issue with this as well, because TI likes fairness, and being inconsiderate is not treating people fairly, but this will be more of an issue if the Isfj themselves are being treated inconsiderately. Next up is having to make tough decisions that affect, not effect, others. This will also be linked with having FE and disliking harmony. There will be a potential for creating conflict if the decision made goes against what some people want to happen, and the Isfj will not like to be the person that has to explain that, and therefore become the focus for any arguments or conflict that occurs. The better cognitive function for making tough decisions is TE, because it will be focused on the most effective outcome, and will put more credence in that than whether the decision will make everybody happy, which is more of a concern for FE. Next up is not fitting in. I would link this with both FE and dominant SI. FE because it is others focused, and in its raw form takes its identity from what others say about it. And SI is traditional and likes to uphold the status quo. Therefore someone with high up SI will want to fit in with other people in the community around them, instead of trying something new or going against the grain, unlike its NI counterpart, which does that daily without even trying. I think ultimately this is an issue for FE, but being an INFJ with dominant NI, I quickly realised that I will never ever fit in, so it stopped being a big issue for me. My FE still wants it to, but my NI wants the freedom to be who I am so much more. That is why I added SI as well, because having SI over NI will add to FE's desire to fit in, whereas NI just can't. Lastly, for the Isfj is not sharing. This will again mainly be linked with FE because it is mean and can cause conflict, but also SI as well, because sharing is an unwritten societal rule. It is something we are taught to do as children, and inherently know is wrong if we don't. So not sharing is going against the long-standing tradition of sharing that we are all taught from a young age. Also, again, I would say this could be an issue for inferior TI, and fairness again. If the item does not belong to one person specifically, it is therefore for anybody's use. It would be unjust for somebody to take ownership of it, and not allow others to use it too. Moving on to ESFJs, their first dislike is being disliked themselves. This will be due to their dominant FE. If they are disliked, it can cause a rift in the harmony, and can cause conflict if the person who dislikes the ESFJ says or does anything about it. And this will be a concern for FE, the potential of conflict. Next is putting oneself before others. This is again linked with FE, because it is a potential for conflict, but also their secondary SI, which values hierarchies, so unless the ESFJ is more important than someone else, they won't want to put themselves above anyone else. SI respects the natural hierarchical structure of society, where some people are considered more important than others, and FE values people in general, so the ESFJ won't want to obviously put someone above someone else, because it may cause conflict. And it is also quite subjective for them to choose to put someone above someone else, and this will go against the normal hierarchical structure. Thirdly is know-it-alls. I would say this was mostly an issue for ESFJ's inferior TI. This is because TI strives to know the ins and outs of everything, as shown with INTPs and ISTPs who have dominant TI, and they're usually pretty intelligent. So having inferior TI may cause a bit of inner conflict when someone acts like they know everything in front of an ESFJ. This is because the ESFJ knows that there is a bit of a weak spot because their TI isn't as strong as their other functions. And this inner conflict will become an issue for FE, which will further exacerbate the problem. Lastly is selfishness. This is probably an even split between FE and TI for the ESFJ. FE won't like it because it is not treating others as they should be treated, and will likely cause issues and arguments. And TI won't like it because it is unfair and unjust to be selfish. Also, alongside ISFJs and not sharing, this will be an issue for SI because we are taught to share and be kind, which selfishness does not uphold, so it will go against the long-standing traditions that we have all been taught. Next up is INFJs, whose first dislike according to the post is feeling forced. This will be an issue for dominant NI, which values freedom and being open-minded. If somebody is forcing an INFJ to do something, they will be taking away their freedom and their ability to make their own decisions. Also, FE won't like this because it will cause conflict between the INFJ and the forcer, if you like. TI will also get involved because forcing someone to do something is both unfair and unjust. It is removing their freedom of choice and free will, which are inherent human rights. This issue is normally much deeper than meets the eye. It is never as simple as I don't want to do something I've been told to do. It is about the underlying motivation of removing a freedom of choice or expression, etc. That is what the INFJs will find fault with. Next is misunderstandings. I would say that misunderstandings in themselves are not a massive issue with INFJs. We're kind of used to that. This is just an issue when said misunderstanding turns itself into an argument, where the aim is just to hurt the other person and there is no desire to sit down and act like mature adults and listen to each other's points of view to see where the misunderstanding came from. That would be an issue for FE, because it can cause unnecessary conflict, which could have been easily avoided by a simple conversation to figure out where the miscommunication was. And it would also be an issue for TI, because arguments that start with a misunderstanding, which is pretty much all of them to be fair, tend to become an excuse for getting out everything that the other person has done or said that annoys you. Just like a sparring match that travels far away from the initial problem and then ends in lots of pain, which is completely unnecessary. TI likes to be concise, and just getting straight to the point would save all the hassle of an argument, and it would also save anyone from causing or experiencing pain. This also can be a common issue experienced by NI, because the way NI users think is so alien to everybody else that we sort of expect that there's bound to be some misunderstanding somewhere. But when the simple misunderstanding is blown way out of proportion into a big issue, or the other person latches on to a point that they think has been said and refuses to budge, then it becomes a problem for NI because it is linked with closed-mindedness, where people refuse to see anything outside of their bubble and they don't want to know about NI's point of view. Next is being surrounded by conflict. This is definitely an issue for FE because FE values harmony and hates conflict, especially if it can't do anything to resolve it. FE absorbs other people's emotions, especially strong ones like anger, and can get very overwhelmed very quickly. So the natural response is to hide away and to process those emotions to get back on top of them. But if they are surrounded by conflict, then there is no escape and the INFJ will just get more and more stressed until they have no choice but to shut down their emotions completely and to turn to their TI to rescue them. Finally is when people intentionally lack perspective. This is a big issue for NI, which is all about perspectives, wanting to understand other people's points of view, their motivations and their beliefs. INFJs are very open-minded and really dislike when people are deliberately closed-minded. We don't mind as much when people are just ignorant of other sides because they've never heard them, as long as they are willing to have a discussion. But when people shut down any other belief or idea just because they think it must be wrong and it doesn't line up with what they think is right, then NI just gives up and wants to walk away. This then becomes fertile ground for conflict, which is an issue for FE. And it's just like what we see happening all of the time when people believe they are right and everybody else is therefore wrong, without bothering to have a conversation with anyone else who holds a different belief to their own. I think this is why I despise politics, because of what it turns people into when they come across someone who voted for a different party to them. At the end of the day, it's just a completely insignificant issue, and there's so many more important things out there to be worried about. Football tends to go in the same box as politics, because people like to start fights with fans from the other team, and that is so not important in the scheme of things. It's just like when people dislike someone based on the colour of their skin, or their nationality or culture. What actually is the point? Anyway, rant over. Lastly is ENFJs, and their first least favourite thing is unresolved conflict, which is a big issue for their dominant FE. When an issue hasn't properly been dealt with, it is like a bad smell festering in the air, and the ENFJ will be constantly flooded with these negative feelings and emotions that are hanging in the air until the issue is resolved. So when it isn't or can't be resolved straight away, it just causes more problems for the ENFJ. And it also doesn't make much sense for NI, which doesn't hold grudges, is more focused on more important issues, and just wants to move on with life. Next is closed offness, which is mainly an issue for FE again. FE values people, and being an extrovert, the ENFJ wants to get to know people and to find where they're at and make a connection. Meeting someone who is very closed off and won't open up at all about anything will be confusing for ENFJs, because they won't know where they stand and will probably find it really difficult to communicate with that person. Thirdly is unfairness. which again is an issue for FE, because it will likely cause conflict if someone feels that they are not being treated fairly as they deserve to be, but will mainly be an issue for their inferior TI, which values fairness. As TI is fourth, it will cause a big issue for ENFJs if unfairness is detected, as their TI will likely overreact because it isn't used as often as their other functions. TI may want to stand up against the unfairness, which will probably cause a conflict in the situation, and will go against FE's desires for harmony, thus creating an inner conflict for the ENFJ. So unfairness is not something that an ENFJ wants to experience, as they will probably be torn about what to do about it. Finally is societal marginalization. Again, FE gets involved with this one, because it is a breeding ground for conflict, but NI also gets involved too, because it is fueled by misunderstandings and closed-mindedness again, where people just make an assumption and run with it, without checking to see if said assumption actually has any truth to it. It is interesting to see that INFJs and ENFJs have very similar least favourite things, because they share the same functions, and ditto with the ISFJ and ESFJ. But it is also interesting to see how different some of the issues are when you compare, for example, the ISFJ and the INFJ. The INFJ's issues are on a much deeper level than the ISFJ, because NI isn't too fussed with what it deems to be trivia or small issues, compared to the grand scale of why we are here, what our purpose is, and where everyone else is on their journey of life. I find it fascinating how we are all similar, but different at the same time. I know that not every other INFJ will feel the same as I do, and may have completely different ideas about the things I have mentioned, just like other personality types may feel completely differently to how I have described them, because I'm not inside their head. I'm only making a judgment based on my current knowledge. I hope you found this interesting. As always, thank you for your time.